What is the Bible?
If you look at the word Bible, it comes from the Greek word biblio, which means books. It's a collection of texts, histories, sermons, poems, writings of different kinds, which are part of what we call the canon of Scripture, the Jewish and Christian scriptures. So it's broken into two parts: the Hebrew scriptures, what Christians would call the Old Testament, and the New Testament, which of course is the Christian scriptures. Christian authors borrowed the Hebrew scriptures as a means in which to interpret the experience of Jesus of Nazareth. And so in a sense, when we talk about the Bible, we're talking about a collection of texts written over a long period of time, between 1000 BCE and 100 AD or thereabouts. But what you see is this collection of texts of a people who come to understand God in a particular way through their experiences. And these experiences are written down and interpreted in many and various ways, depending on the kind of source. So, for example, you look at something like the book of Psalms. What you find is that these psalms are themselves songs of praise that were used probably in the Temple of Jerusalem. Some of them, in fact, we know come from other sources, in some cases certainly Babylonian and in some cases Egyptian hymns. But what they've done is they've removed the names of whatever gods they were in the originals and rewritten them slightly and brought in the name of the Lord in place of Aten or Marduk or whoever else it was that the Babylonians or Egyptians were praising at the time. So you can see that there's an extensive borrowing among people of the Middle East. And in a sense, they found things that were useful, that fitted their experience of God, and they would incorporate them. For example, when we look at the so-called historical texts of the Old Testament, many of them are deeply influenced by the kind of literature of the time, particularly the later Old Testament writings and certainly the writings of the New Testament have, some scholars say, echoes of the way in which the classical Greek sagas were told. In a sense, then, the scriptures are themselves a collection that has been edited and re-edited and worked and reworked, and more often than not, it's the interests of the author that help us to work out that this part comes from a particular time and place. So, for example, if it's a group of temple priests who are, in a sense, reinterpreting the history of Israel, there's an emphasis, for example, on cult and worship. And others, if it's more interested in, for example, the relationship between the individual and God, will have a different way of looking at it. For example, in the early first 5 books of the Old Testament, you see, in fact, 4 different sources, which explains also why, in some cases in the Old Testament, you have the same story told again, as in the case of Genesis, where you have 2 accounts of the creation, because they're 2 different sources who are writing the same creation story.
All this said, however, Catholics believe that the Bible is the Word of God. Watch the next video in our theological education series to find out how the Bible is the Word of God.